My wife joked in Arabic at the family dinner. I smiled politely. Then I answered her, in perfect Arabic. Her family went silent. So there I was, sitting at the Al Sayed family table like some kind of exotic zoo animal that had accidentally wandered into the wrong habitat. And let me tell you, the irony wasn't lost on me. 12 people, yeah, 12 whole human beings, were chattering away in rapid-fire Arabic around me, their voices rising and falling like some kind of linguistic symphony that I apparently wasn't invited to conduct. My fork was doing this awkward hover thing over a plate of perfectly good lamb that was getting colder by the second, while everyone around me laughed like they were watching the funniest comedy special ever recorded, and the punchline was, well, me, the invisible American husband, the guy who married into this circus without reading the fine print. My wife, Layla, beautiful, brilliant, Oxford-educated Layla, sat beside me with this sweet little smile plastered on her face, the kind of smile that could sell ice to Eskimos or convince a man that sitting through this linguistic torture session was somehow a sign of love and commitment. She was translating for me, bless her heart, and by translating I mean she was feeding me the PG-rated, Disney Channel version of whatever roast session was currently happening at my expense. Her interpretation skills were, let's say, creative, selective. The kind of selective editing that would make a Hollywood producer proud. They're asking if you like the food, she'd say, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that should have been my first red flag 2 years ago. Sure, Layla. Sure they are. Because what they were really saying, and oh boy, did I know exactly what they were really saying, was more along the lines of they're asking if you're domesticated enough to make coffee without burning down the kitchen, or if Layla needs to keep you on a leash to prevent any major household disasters. But hey, who's counting? Not me. Sitting here with my American smile and my American patience, pretending like I couldn't understand every single word coming out of their mouths. I smiled politely, the kind of smile I'd perfected over years of corporate meetings and dealing with difficult clients. The smile that said, sure, go ahead and mock the foreign husband. This'll be real fun later when the tables turn, and trust me, they will turn. It was the smile of a man who knew something nobody else in the room knew. And let me tell you, that knowledge was sitting in my chest like a loaded gun, just waiting for the right moment to go off. Everyone at that table thought they had me figured out. The clueless American son-in-law who couldn't tell the difference between hello and your shoes are ugly in Arabic. The guy who needed everything explained to him like he was a golden retriever trying to understand quantum physics. The foreign husband who was nice enough, sure, but clearly out of his depth in this world of Middle Eastern family dynamics and cultural expectations that went back generations. They probably had a family group chat somewhere, because of course they did. Every Arab family has a WhatsApp group with like 50 members, where they discussed me like I was some kind of ongoing science experiment. Week 47 of studying the American husband still hasn't learned to remove his shoes at the door without being reminded. What they didn't know, and oh man, this was the kicker that made sitting through these dinners almost worth it, was that I spoke Arabic better than half the people at that table. Not just tourist Arabic, not just where's the bathroom and how much does this cost Arabic, but actual, fluent, business-level Arabic that I'd been using for 6 years in Dubai running corporate contracts for a firm that would make their eyes pop out of their heads if they knew. 6 years of negotiating deals, managing teams, navigating the complex world of Middle Eastern business culture where what you say is only half as important as how you say it and when you say it. 6 years of learning not just the language, but the subtext, the implications, the subtle art of reading between the lines in a culture that practically invented reading between the lines. But apparently, my resume hadn't made it to the family WhatsApp group. Shocking, I know. Maybe it got lost in translation along with Layla's actual respect for me, or her honesty, or any number of things that seemed to have gone missing somewhere between our wedding day and this moment right here, watching her mother's cousin twice removed, or was it her aunt's second cousin? I'd lost track of the family tree, which had more branches than a California redwood, gesturing animatedly while explaining something that definitely involved the word for simple or simpleton, which I'd heard about 17 times already tonight. Tonight, I'd made a decision. I was going to keep quiet. I was going to sit here, smile my American smile, eat my lamb that was now officially room temperature, and let them think they were getting away with it. I was going to be the world's best audience for their comedy routine about the dumb foreign husband who couldn't find his way out of a paper bag without GPS and a translator. I was going to nod and smile and pretend like every insult was going over my head like a paper airplane in a hurricane. For now, because here's the thing about keeping secrets. They're only fun when you know exactly when you're going to reveal them. And I was saving this particular revelation for the perfect moment, the kind of moment that would make this entire evening of subtle humiliation worth every second. I was like a poker player sitting on a royal flush, watching everyone else at the table bet big on their pairs and their straights, completely oblivious to the fact that I was about to clean house. Layla squeezed my hand under the table, probably thinking she was being supportive, probably thinking I was grateful for her translations and her presence beside me in this sea of Arabic conversation. I squeezed back, because I'm not a monster, and also because maintaining cover was important. Let her think I was the grateful, slightly confused husband who needed her to navigate this big, scary world of her family dynamics. Let her think she was protecting me from something, when really, I was protecting her from the embarrassment that was coming down the pike like a freight train with no brakes. The lamb was actually pretty good, now that I'd finally taken a bite. Perfectly seasoned, tender, cooked just right. Shame I couldn't focus on enjoying it while Uncle whoever he was across the table was explaining to everyone how Americans don't understand real food. We just eat hamburgers and think ketchup is a vegetable. I mean, he wasn't entirely wrong about the ketchup thing. Congress did try to classify it as a vegetable back in the Reagan era, which was hilarious and depressing in equal measure, but still. The audacity of this man to insult American cuisine while I was literally eating his family's food and pretending to be too stupid to understand the insult. That took talent. That took commitment to the bit. I was learning so much tonight. Not about Arabic culture. I already knew that backward and forward. Not about family dynamics. Dubai had taught me everything I needed to know about that. No, I was learning about exactly how little my wife respected me, exactly how much her family thought of me as some kind of charity project, and exactly how sweet revenge was going to taste when I finally decided to drop the mask and show them who they'd really been dealing with this whole time. But that would come later. Right now, I had lamb to finish and insults to mentally catalog for future reference. The night was young, and the show was just getting started. Looking back now, with all the wisdom that comes from hindsight and a healthy dose of what the hell was I thinking, I can pinpoint the exact moment I should have known this whole thing was going to be more complicated than I'd signed up for. It was 2 years ago, at a conference in London where I'd been sent to represent my firm at some mind-numbingly boring symposium on international trade regulations. The kind of event where everyone wears expensive suits and pretends to care about tariff structures while really just networking and drinking overpriced coffee. That's where Layla had swept into my life like a tornado in designer heels, and honestly, I didn't stand a chance. She was brilliant in that effortless way that makes mere mortals feel like we're operating with half a brain. MBA from Oxford. Not just any MBA, mind you, but from Oxford, which she managed to drop into conversation within the first 15 minutes of meeting me, along with her thesis on emerging markets in the Middle East and her fluency in 4 languages. She was poised, articulate, funny in a sharp-witted kind of way that made me want to keep up with her banter, and she had this smile that could probably negotiate peace treaties if she aimed it at the right people. I was smitten. I was done for. I was that guy who sees a beautiful woman and immediately starts planning the wedding in his head, which in retrospect was probably my first mistake. What Layla had conveniently forgotten to mention during our whirlwind romance. And let me tell you, it was a whirlwind, the kind that picks up trailer homes and drops them in other states, was that her family tree had more titles than the entire British Royal Library. I'm talking serious pedigree here, the kind of family connections that make people in certain circles sit up and take notice. Her grandfather had been some kind of diplomat or ambassador or something equally impressive that involved lots of formal dinners and international significance. Her grandmother came from old money, the kind that doesn't talk about being old money because everyone already knows. There were uncles who owned things, plural, and cousins who ran things, also plural, and a general sense that the Al Sayed family name opened doors that regular people didn't even know existed. Me? I was the nice foreign husband, which is Arabic code for temporary distraction that we're all being polite about until this phase passes. I was the guy who'd somehow convinced their daughter to marry outside the carefully curated circle of appropriate suitors who probably all had their own impressive family trees and could trace their lineages back to someone who once did something important somewhere. I was the American interloper, the outsider, the guy who didn't quite fit the mold, but who Layla had apparently decided was worth the family drama. Her father, Kareem, ran a construction empire that had projects across 3 continents and made more money in a quarter than I'd probably see in a lifetime. He was the kind of man who wore expensive watches and spoke in that measured, careful way that powerful people do when they're used to having their words carry weight. He looked at me like I was a puzzle he hadn't quite figured out yet, like he was waiting for me to reveal some fatal flaw that would justify his initial skepticism about this whole arrangement. Every handshake felt like a test. Every conversation felt like a job interview I wasn't sure I was passing. Her mother, Samira, didn't just run the household. She ran everyone else's lives too, with the kind of efficiency and precision that would make a military general jealous. She knew everyone's business, had opinions on everything from proper table settings to appropriate career trajectories, and could communicate more with a single raised eyebrow than most people could with an entire speech. When Samira looked at me, I could practically see her mental calculations running. Foreign husband plus daughter with Oxford MBA equals questionable life choices that reflect poorly on my parenting. She was polite, sure, but it was that particular brand of Middle Eastern politeness that's really just a socially acceptable form of judgment. And then there were the brothers, Omar and Rafiq, professional eye-rollers and skeptics extraordinaire, who had apparently appointed themselves as the official gatekeepers of their sister's happiness and dignity. Omar was the older one, already working in the family business and clearly being groomed to take over the empire someday, which gave him this air of self-importance that was both impressive and incredibly annoying. Rafiq was still in university, studying something finance-related that he loved to talk about at length to anyone who'd listen, and he had perfected the art of the dismissive glance. You know, that look that says, "I'm younger than you, but somehow still convinced I'm smarter than you." Together, they formed this united front of "Why did Layla marry down?" energy that permeated every family gathering like an uncomfortable fog. Every dinner felt like a board meeting where I wasn't on the agenda, but was somehow still the main topic of discussion. There were subtle digs about American culture, because apparently all Americans are the same, and we all eat nothing but fast food while watching reality TV and being generally uncultured. There were pointed questions about my career that seemed designed to highlight exactly how much less impressive my job was compared to whatever empire building the Al Sayed men were engaged in. There were comparisons to other people's sons-in-law who were doctors or engineers or came from families that Samira approved of, dropped into conversation like little landmines disguised as casual observations. Miriam's husband just opened his 3rd clinic, Samira would say, like she was commenting on the weather, but really she was saying, "Why couldn't you marry a doctor like your cousin did?" I heard Yasmin's husband just closed a major deal with a European firm. Kareem would mention casually, which translated to "Your husband seems nice, but what exactly does he do again?" The pressure was constant but subtle, the kind of thing that gets under your skin slowly, like water dripping on stone, wearing you down over time until you start questioning yourself. Was I good enough? Was I successful enough? Was I Arab enough? Whatever that meant. The answer, according to the silent consensus at these family dinners, was probably no on all counts. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It becomes your superpower if you know how to use it. I'd learned that in business. Learned it in Dubai, where being an American in a Middle Eastern market meant people made assumptions about you before you even opened your mouth. You could either get offended and fight against those assumptions every single day, exhausting yourself in a battle you'd never fully win, or you could use them. Let people think you're just another clueless foreigner. Let them underestimate your intelligence, your cultural knowledge, your language skills. And then, when the moment was right, when the stakes were high enough, you could flip the script and watch their faces change. So I kept my humor handy. It was my shield and my sword. The thing that kept me sane through all the family dinners and thinly veiled criticisms and moments where I felt like I was being evaluated for a position I'd already been hired for. You can't be offended if you're too busy laughing, right? That was my philosophy. Every dismissive comment, every skeptical look, every conversation in Arabic that they thought I couldn't understand. I cataloged it all with a smile, turning it into material for the comedy routine that was my life, starring me as the underestimated underdog who was playing a much longer game than anyone realized. The Damascus Rose restaurant glittered like someone had taken a wedding cake, covered it in gold leaf, and decided to serve overpriced Middle Eastern fusion cuisine inside it. I'm talking chandeliers that probably cost more than my first car, marble floors so polished you could see your reflection contemplating your life choices, and table settings that had more forks than any reasonable human being should need for one meal. This wasn't just dinner. This was a production, a statement, the kind of place where you knew the bill was going to make your credit card weep before you even sat down. And naturally, as the foreign son-in-law trying to prove himself worthy of the Al Sayed name. Guess who was expected to pick up the tab? Yours truly, the American with the apparently infinite wallet. The waiter, dressed in a uniform that was somehow more formal than most people's wedding attire, glided over to pour wine with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. Red wine. Expensive wine. Wine that I wasn't actually allowed to drink yet, because we were still in that awkward appetizer phase where taking a sip would be socially premature, but that I was absolutely expected to pay for because that's how these family dinners worked. I watched the deep burgundy liquid fill everyone's glasses and mentally calculated how much this bottle alone was setting me back. Somewhere, my bank account was crying. But hey, at least I was buying my way into family acceptance, right? Right? Conversation swirled around the table in Arabic, musical and sharp and coded in that way that family conversations always are when there's an outsider present. It flowed like water, rising and falling with laughter and dramatic pauses and those moments where everyone talks over each other, because Middle Eastern family dynamics don't believe in taking turns. It was beautiful, actually, in an anthropological kind of way. If I wasn't the subject of half the conversation, I might have actually enjoyed it. Instead, I sat there with my polite American smile, my untouched wine glass, and my growing collection of mental notes about exactly what everyone was saying. Layla's cousin, I think her name was Nadia, or maybe Noor. Honestly, there were so many cousins I'd lost track somewhere around cousin number 15, leaned across the table with this concerned expression that wasn't fooling anyone. He looks confused, she said in Arabic, like I was a lost puppy who'd wandered into the wrong restaurant. Her tone had that particular quality of fake sympathy that women use when they're pretending to be nice, but are actually being catty as hell. Her aunt, Samira's sister, whose name I definitely should remember, but had completely blanked on because my brain could only hold so much Al Sayed family information at once, nodded in agreement. He smiles like he doesn't understand, she added, and I swear to God there was this little smirk playing at the corner of her mouth, like she was enjoying this observation way too much. It's sweet, really, like a child at a grown-up party. I smiled wider, because what else was I going to do? Flip the table? Start speaking Arabic and ruin the surprise I'd been carefully cultivating for weeks? No, I was a professional. I was a man with a plan. I was also a man who was adding both of these women to my mental list of people who were going to feel really stupid really soon. But that's beside the point. The table chuckled, that polite, knowing chuckle that happens when everyone's in on the joke except for one person, and that person is sitting right there pretending not to notice. Uncle Mahmoud, who'd already had 3 glasses of wine and was working on his 4th, made some comment about Americans and their inability to handle real conversation, which was rich coming from a guy who'd spent the last 20 minutes talking about his new Mercedes and how the leather seats were imported from Germany, like that was supposed to impress anyone. But then, Layla delivered the line that would live in family legend, the line that would be replayed in my head during every divorce proceeding, an angry phone call and moment of vindication that was coming down the pipeline. She turned to her mother, speaking in that perfect, unaccented Arabic that she'd grown up with, the kind of fluency that comes from being raised in a household where the language isn't just spoken but lived, and she said with this little laugh that was supposed to be affectionate, but just sounded condescending. He's sweet, but simple. You have to explain things to him slowly, like you're talking to someone who's never left their hometown. Sweet, but simple. Let that sink in for a moment. My wife, the woman I'd married, the woman I'd moved countries for, the woman who was supposed to be my partner in this life we were building together, had just called me simple. in front of her entire extended family, at a restaurant where I was footing the bill. While I sat there understanding every single word, including the implication that I was some kind of intellectual charity case she'd taken on as a personal development project. The table howled. I'm talking full-on laughter, the kind that makes people wipe tears from their eyes and slap the table for emphasis. Omar nearly choked on his lamb. Rafiq was grinning like he'd just won the lottery, and even Kareem, stoic, serious Kareem, had this amused expression that suggested he'd been thinking the same thing, but was too polite to say it out loud. The cousins were exchanging glances that said, "Finally, someone said it." And the aunts were nodding like Layla had just voiced what they'd all been thinking for 2 years. My ears burned. I felt the heat creeping up my neck, that physical manifestation of anger and embarrassment that no amount of corporate training or cultural adaptation could completely suppress. My jaw clenched. My hands, resting casually on the table, wanted to curl into fists. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stand up, to defend myself, to explain exactly how not simple I was, and how many languages I spoke, and how many business deals I'd closed while they were all sitting around judging me. But I didn't. Instead, I raised my wine glass, that expensive wine I was paying for, and smiled. I smiled like a man who knew something nobody else knew, like a poker player looking at his cards and realizing he's got the winning hand. I smiled like someone who was about to flip the entire script on this dinner party from hell. To family, I said in English, my voice perfectly pleasant, perfectly calm, perfectly pitched to sound like a guy who was just happy to be included. I clinked my glass against Layla's, against her mother's, making eye contact with each person at the table like I was toasting to our wonderful togetherness and not mentally planning the most satisfying revelation of my entire life. They drank, still chuckling about the simple American husband who needed things explained slowly. They had no idea, not a single clue. They were all so busy enjoying their joke, so confident in their superiority, so convinced that they'd figured me out and filed me away in the box labeled, nice, but not quite good enough. I took a sip of wine, finally, after all that waiting, and let it sit on my tongue for a moment. It was good wine, expensive wine, the kind that's supposed to pair perfectly with lamb and humiliation. I savored it. I savored the moment. I savored the knowledge that tonight, right here at this glittering restaurant with its stupid chandeliers and its even stupider assumptions, the subtitle feature was about to turn on. And when it did, this family was going to learn a very important lesson about underestimating the simple American husband. The roast of the century was about to become the reveal of the century, and I had front row seats to watch it all unfold. Inside my head, I was translating every single word like I was some kind of human subtitle machine, the kind that doesn't miss a beat or a nuance or a particularly savage insult disguised as a casual observation. Years of business meetings in Dubai had made me fluent. Not just conversational, not just good enough to get by, but actually, genuinely, impressively fluent in the kind of Arabic that made native speakers occasionally forget I wasn't one of them. I could catch idioms, understand regional dialects, pick up on the subtle differences between formal and informal speech, and most importantly, I could hear exactly what people were really saying underneath what they were pretending to say. It was like having a superpower, except instead of flying or shooting lasers from my eyes, I could understand when my mother-in-law was calling me useless in 3 different ways while smiling and offering me more hummus. Tonight, though, I wasn't just translating. I was keeping score. I was documenting. I was building a mental highlight reel of every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment of casual disrespect that I could replay later when karma finally showed up to this party fashionably late, but devastatingly effective. I leaned back in my chair, trying to look relaxed and oblivious, while internally I was running commentary like a sports announcer covering the Olympics of family dysfunction. And here comes Omar with an opening jab about American work ethic, I narrated to myself, watching Layla's older brother gesture with his fork while explaining to his cousin how Americans leave work at 5 p.m. like they're running from a burning building, unlike serious businessmen who understand that success requires sacrifice. Weak delivery, predictable angle. I give it a 4 out of 10 for originality, but points for the confident hand gestures. He really sells it with those hand gestures. Samira swooped in next, because of course she did, transitioning smoothly from Omar's commentary into her own perfectly crafted piece of passive-aggressive artistry. She mentioned, so casually, like she was commenting on the weather, that her friend Alia's son-in-law had just been promoted to senior vice president at some international bank, and wasn't that wonderful, and didn't it make her so proud to see young men taking their careers seriously and really applying themselves? The implication hung in the air like expensive perfume. Unlike some people at this table who shall remain nameless, but are definitely sitting right here paying for everyone's wine. Samira with the passive-aggressive cross. I continued my internal sports commentary, channeling every ESPN announcer I'd ever heard. Beautiful form, perfect execution. She doesn't even look at me while she's doing it. 10 points to mother-in-law. The judges are going wild. That's the kind of insult that's going to sting for hours. Rafiq jumped in with something about how he'd explained cryptocurrency to me 3 times last month, and I'd still looked confused, which was hilarious considering I'd been deliberately playing dumb, because watching him mansplain blockchain technology while getting half the details wrong was more entertaining than any Netflix show I'd ever watched. The kid had confidence, I'd give him that. Completely misplaced confidence, but confidence nonetheless. Rafiq attempts the technological superiority angle. I narrated. Bold choice for someone who still asks his mother to do his laundry. The crowd is divided on this one. Some appreciate the audacity. Others are questioning whether he should be throwing stones from his glass house. Layla reached for my hand under the table, her fingers intertwining with mine in what was probably supposed to be a gesture of affection or solidarity, or whatever couples do when they're presenting a united front to the world. Except we weren't a united front. We were barely on the same team at this point. Her hand felt cold, or maybe mine was just hot from all the suppressed rage and amusement battling it out in my nervous system. The fake affection dripped off her touch like syrup, sweet, sticky, artificial, the kind of thing that seems nice until you realize it's just sugar with no substance. You okay, honey? She whispered to me in English, leaning close enough that her family couldn't hear, but not so close that it looked like we were having a private conversation that might exclude everyone else. Her breath smelled like wine and mint and lies. Her eyes had that concerned look that she'd probably practiced in the mirror, the one that said, "I'm a caring wife who's checking on her husband," but really meant, "Please keep playing along with this charade so I don't look bad in front of my family." "Perfect," I said, grinning at her with every tooth showing, the kind of grin that probably looked genuine to everyone else, but that she should have recognized as dangerous if she'd been paying any attention to who I actually was instead of who she'd decided I was. Learning so much tonight. This is incredibly educational. I feel like I'm getting a master class in family dynamics. She smiled back, relieved, probably thinking I meant I was learning about Arabic culture or Middle Eastern traditions, or how to properly appreciate the 17 different dishes that had been ordered without my input. She thought I was talking about expanding my cultural horizons, becoming more integrated into her world, understanding the beautiful complexity of her heritage. What I actually meant was that I was learning about betrayal. I was learning about exactly how little respect my own wife had for me. I was learning about the precise depth of her family's disdain and the specific ways they'd constructed their little narrative about the poor, simple American who'd somehow tricked their daughter into marriage. I was learning about who these people really were when they thought I couldn't understand them. And let me tell you, it was an education worth more than any business school could provide. Uncle Mahmoud, now on his 5th glass of wine and getting progressively louder, launched into a story about some business deal he'd made in the 90s that somehow proved that Arabs were naturally better negotiators than Westerners. It was the kind of story that old men tell at dinner parties, full of self-aggrandizement and convenient memory editing, where every detail had been polished over years of retelling until it bore only a passing resemblance to whatever actually happened. Everyone nodded along politely, because that's what you do when drunk uncles tell stories, even when those stories are thinly veiled attempts to remind everyone at the table about the inherent superiority of their culture over mine. Uncle Mahmoud takes the stage with a classic back-in-my-day narrative. I continued my internal commentary. He's really committing to this performance. Someone should probably cut him off soon, but that would require acknowledging that he's 3 drinks past coherent. The family chooses to ignore this, as is tradition. A cousin I'd met exactly twice and whose name I was pretty sure started with an A or possibly an H. Arabic names all started blending together after you'd been introduced to 47 relatives in one wedding weekend. Made a joke about how Americans think football means something you play with your hands, and everyone laughed like this was the pinnacle of observational comedy. It was lazy humor, the kind of cultural stereotyping that people fall back on when they can't think of anything actually clever to say, but it landed because I was there, the perfect target, the American specimen they could all bond over mocking. I laughed along, because that's what the simple American husband would do. I raised my glass again, because apparently tonight was all about toasting to my own humiliation. I nodded and smiled and played my role perfectly, like an actor who'd been rehearsing for this performance for 2 years and was finally ready for opening night. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you time. Time to observe. Time to plan. Time to watch everyone reveal exactly who they are while they think you're too clueless to notice. After dessert, some elaborate baklava situation that probably cost more per square inch than gold and came with a presentation that involved the waiter describing each layer like he was narrating a documentary about architectural marvels. The conversation shifted from casual family mockery to business talk. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the pivot point where dinner theater became something infinitely more interesting. Kareem, who'd been relatively quiet through most of the meal, sat up a little straighter and launched into what was clearly his favorite topic: himself and his incredibly successful construction empire that was expanding faster than anyone could have predicted. He started talking about this new project, some massive development deal that was going to break ground in 6 months and involve partnerships across multiple countries and generate revenue that made my salary look like pocket change. His voice took on that particular quality that successful men get when they're discussing their achievements: confident, measured, with just enough false modesty thrown in to make it seem like they're not bragging, even though they absolutely are. The whole table leaned in, because when Kareem talked business, everyone listened. It was like watching a master class in commanding attention, and I had to admit, grudgingly, that the man knew how to work a room. "We've been negotiating with a new American partner," he said, swirling his wine glass in that pretentious way that people do when they want you to know they understand wine. "Very promising firm. They handle international contracts, have excellent connections in the Middle East, understand how to navigate the cultural complexities that make or break these deals. Not like most American companies that come in thinking they can just transplant their way of doing business and expect everyone to adapt." I nodded along, keeping my expression politely interested, like I was just happy to be included in the grown-up conversation. Inside I was grinning like the Cheshire cat who'd just swallowed the canary and was about to ask for seconds. Because here's the thing that nobody at this table knew: the delicious irony that was about to make the last 2 hours of subtle humiliation completely worth it. That new American partner Kareem was bragging about? That promising firm with excellent connections and cultural understanding? Yeah, that was my company. My firm. The one I'd been working at for 8 years. The one I'd helped build into an international powerhouse. The one where I wasn't just some mid-level employee, but actually ran the entire Middle Eastern division. Layla had fed him pieces of my professional life like breadcrumbs over the past 2 years, carefully edited snippets that never quite connected into a complete picture. She'd mentioned that I worked in international business, that I did some consulting, that I traveled occasionally for work. What she'd never done was actually explain what I did, where I worked, or the fact that her father's company had been courting my firm for the better part of 6 months, sending proposal after proposal, increasingly desperate to land this partnership, because it would open doors that even the mighty Al Sayed construction empire couldn't kick down on its own. The consultant they sent was impressive, Kareem continued, clearly enjoying having the table's attention. Sharp, understood the market, spoke perfect Arabic. Finally, an American who's done his homework. We're meeting again next week to finalize terms. This partnership could triple our international presence within 2 years. Omar jumped in, because of course he did, adding something about how rare it was to find American business partners who actually respected Middle Eastern business culture instead of just throwing money around and expecting results. Rafiq nodded sagely, like he had any idea what he was talking about, and the cousins made appropriately impressed noises because that's what you do when the patriarch is describing his latest conquest. I just sat there, my face a mask of polite interest, nodding along like I was learning something new and fascinating about the exciting world of international construction contracts. "That sounds amazing," I said in English, keeping my tone exactly calibrated to sound impressed but not too interested, like someone who was trying to follow along with a conversation that was slightly over his head. "You must be really proud of putting this deal together." "It's what we do," Kareem said with false modesty that wasn't fooling anyone. "Build relationships, create opportunities, expand the family legacy. This American firm understands that business in our part of the world is about more than just contracts and numbers. It's about trust, respect, cultural understanding." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it alongside the overpriced baklava. Here was my father-in-law, explaining to me the importance of cultural understanding while sitting across from a son-in-law his entire family had spent the evening mocking for his supposed cultural ignorance. Here was a man bragging about finding an American partner who got it, while remaining completely oblivious to the fact that his daughter had married someone who'd been navigating Middle Eastern business culture successfully for years. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to stand up and take a bow. I wanted to freeze this moment and frame it, because the setup was so perfect it felt like something out of a movie. But I didn't. Instead, I took another sip of wine, that expensive wine I was still paying for, and asked innocuous questions that made me sound interested but clueless. "What kind of projects will you be working on? And how long do these international partnerships usually take to develop?" The kind of questions that someone who knew nothing about international business might ask, the kind that made everyone at the table feel smart for knowing more than me. Samira mentioned something about how wonderful it must be to work with competent people, with a pointed look in my direction that suggested I didn't fall into that category. The cousins exchanged glances that said they were glad Kareem had found a proper business partner instead of having to rely on family connections to someone like me. Layla squeezed my hand again, probably thinking she was being supportive, probably feeling a little bit sorry that her impressive father was talking about things that were beyond my simple American comprehension. By the time the check came, and yes, I paid it, all $347 of it, plus tip, because apparently being mocked costs extra, the stage was set. The pieces were in place. The irony was loaded and ready to fire. Kareem had his big important meeting scheduled with my firm next week, a meeting where he'd be sitting down with the senior consultant he'd been dealing with, the one who spoke perfect Arabic and understood the market and had impressed him so much. That consultant was me. I was the guy he'd been negotiating with, the one his company had been sending increasingly eager emails to, the one who held the keys to whether this deal happened at all. And next week, when he walked into that conference room expecting to finalize the partnership that was going to triple his international presence, he was going to get a surprise that would make tonight's dinner conversation look like small talk. I nodded along as Kareem talked about projected revenues and market expansion and the brilliant future ahead. I smiled as Samira made another comment about the importance of surrounding yourself with capable people. I thanked them all for a wonderful evening as we stood to leave, because I was nothing if not polite, even when I was mentally planning the most satisfying professional power play of my career. "Sure, tell me more about this brilliant foreign consultant," I thought as we walked out of the Damascus Rose restaurant into the cool night air. "Tell me all about how impressive he is, how culturally aware, how sharp. I hear he's charming and multilingual and exactly the kind of partner your company desperately needs." By the time I handed my valet ticket to the attendant, the stage was set. I was done pretending to be the silent prop at my own roast. Next week was going to be very, very interesting. It started small, the way most revolutions do, not with a bang, but with a carefully calculated whisper that would grow into a roar. We were lingering over Turkish coffee that had appeared without anyone ordering it, because apparently at fancy restaurants they just keep bringing you things until either you leave or your wallet files for bankruptcy. The conversation had drifted from Kareem's business triumphs to more mundane family gossip. Who was getting married? Whose son had gotten into which university? The usual stuff that families discuss when they've run out of ways to subtly insult the foreigner at the table. I was half listening, cataloging everything in my mental filing system, when Samira decided to go for one more jab before the evening ended. She said something in Arabic to Layla, just loud enough for the whole table to hear, but with that performative quality that made it clear she wanted an audience. "You'll need to train him properly," she said. using a word that you'd typically reserve for teaching a dog to sit or a child to use the bathroom. Men don't come knowing how to be good husbands. It takes patience and firm guidance. My mother had to practically rebuild your father from scratch when we married. She laughed, that tinkling laugh that wealthy women perfect over years of charity luncheons and social gatherings. And the table joined in, because when Samira made a joke, everyone laughed, even if it wasn't funny. That was it. That was the moment. The final straw that broke the camel's back, or in this case, broke the last thread of patience holding my carefully constructed facade together. 2 years of biting my tongue. 2 years of playing dumb. 2 years of letting them think I was some kind of project that needed fixing, some rough material that Layla was nobly shaping into an acceptable human being. I was done. I laughed. Not a fake laugh, not a polite chuckle, but a real, genuine laugh that came from somewhere deep in my chest, and probably sounded slightly unhinged because at this point, I was feeling slightly unhinged in the best possible way. The kind of unhinged you feel right before you do something you've been planning for months and can't quite believe you're actually going through with it. And then I answered her. In Arabic. Perfect, fluent, unaccented Arabic that could have come from someone who'd grown up in Damascus or Beirut or any of the major cities where the language flowed like music. You know, Samira, I said, watching her face freeze mid-smile like someone had hit pause on a video. I actually think I turned out pretty well without the training. Though I appreciate your concern about my development. The table went silent. I'm not talking about that polite, momentary pause in conversation that happens naturally when someone says something unexpected. I'm talking about the kind of silence that crashes over a room like a tidal wave. The kind where you can hear the air conditioning humming and someone's watch ticking and every single person's brain simultaneously short-circuiting as they try to process what just happened. Forks paused mid-air, hovering over plates like they'd forgotten their purpose. Wine glasses stopped halfway to mouths. Someone, I think it was one of the cousins, actually gasped, which would have been funny if the whole situation wasn't already comedy gold. Omar choked on his water, actually choked, with liquid coming out of his nose in a way that would have been embarrassing for him if he hadn't been so busy looking like he'd just seen a ghost. Rafiq's mouth hung open in a perfect O shape, his usual smug expression replaced by something that looked like a computer trying to process information it wasn't programmed to handle. Kareem just stared at me, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that might have been respect or might have been horror. Honestly, it was hard to tell. Layla's face went pale, actually pale, like someone had literally drained the color from her skin. Her hand, still holding mine under the table, went completely limp. What? She started in English, then caught herself, then started again, then just stopped altogether because apparently her brain had completely shut down and rebooted into safe mode. I smiled at her, the same polite smile I'd been wearing all evening, except now it had an edge to it that could cut glass. Surprise, Habibti, I said, using the Arabic term of endearment with just enough sweetness to make it sting. Sorry, I thought we were all multilingual now. Isn't that what your family values? Cultural understanding? Communication? I took a sip of my Turkish coffee, which was actually pretty good. Kudos to the Damascus Rose for at least getting that right. And let the silence stretch for another few seconds, because timing is everything in comedy, and this was the greatest comedic moment of my life. Then I leaned back in my chair, completely relaxed, and decided to really commit to the bit. Should I translate the last 2 hours of conversation for everyone? I asked the table at large, still in Arabic, my tone conversational like I was offering to explain the plot of a movie they'd missed. I took excellent notes. For example, Omar, you said about 45 minutes ago that Americans have the work ethic of lazy teenagers. Interesting observation from someone who showed up an hour late to his own father's birthday party last month because he couldn't decide which watch to wear. Omar's face went red. Not pink, not flushed, but actually red like a tomato that had been left in the sun too long. And Rafiq, I continued, turning to the younger brother who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. Your explanation of cryptocurrency was adorable, but you mixed up blockchain with basic encryption about 17 times. I didn't correct you because watching you confidently explain things incorrectly was more entertaining than anything on Netflix this month. Rafiq made a sound like a small wounded animal. It was glorious. Samira, I said, turning to my mother-in-law who looked like she'd just witnessed the apocalypse and wasn't sure how to feel about it. You mentioned that I needed to be trained properly. I actually really appreciated that. It's good to know that after 8 years of successfully running international business operations in the Middle East, negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts in Arabic, and managing teams across 3 continents, I still have room for improvement. Never stop learning, right? That's what makes life interesting. I took another sip of coffee and turned to Layla, who had progressed from pale to looking slightly green, like she might actually be sick right there at the table. "And sweetheart," I said, switching back to English for this part because I wanted her to understand every single word with crystal clarity. "You told your family I was sweet but simple, that I needed things explained slowly. That was my favorite part of the evening, really. Very affirming to hear what your family thinks of me, but even more affirming to hear that you agree with them." The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. Everyone was staring. At me, at each other, at Layla, at their plates, anywhere that might provide an escape from the nuclear bomb that had just detonated in the middle of their pleasant family dinner. Then the waiter appeared, bless his heart, probably sensing the tension from across the restaurant. He approached our table carefully, like someone approaching a live explosive device. "Is everything all right?" he asked in English, his eyes darting between me and the shell-shocked faces around the table. I turned to him and smiled, switching seamlessly back to Arabic. "Everything is perfect," I said. "Best dinner I've had in months. Really educational." The waiter's eyes widened slightly. Then, and I swear this made the whole evening worth it, he leaned down slightly and whispered in Arabic, "Sir, that was beautiful. I've been watching them mock you all night." "Well done." Layla tried damage control immediately, because of course she did. Switching to English like changing languages would somehow reset the conversation and undo the last 5 minutes of nuclear-level truth bombs I just dropped on her entire family. "He's joking," she said, her voice pitching slightly higher than normal, that telltale sign that she was panicking and trying desperately not to show it. She laughed, but it came out all wrong, strangled and artificial like the sound a dying hyena might make if hyenas could experience social embarrassment. "He learned a few phrases to surprise us. Isn't that sweet? He's been practicing. A few phrases. A few phrases." The audacity of this woman to sit here, after I'd just delivered a perfectly conjugated, idiomatically correct breakdown of the evening's events in Arabic that would make a linguistics professor weep with joy, and try to convince everyone that I'd just memorized some tourist basics like, "Where's the bathroom?" and "How much is this?" I had to admire the commitment to the narrative, even as the ship was actively sinking and the orchestra was packing up their instruments. I nodded enthusiastically, playing along for exactly 3 seconds before completely torpedoing her attempted rescue mission. "Absolutely," I said in Arabic, then switched to English. "Just a few phrases. Like the phrase for 'your husband is sweet but simple,' or the phrase for 'Americans don't understand real food,' or my personal favorite, the phrase for 'we're only being polite to him because we have to be.' Yeah, just picked up those casual, everyday expressions. Super basic stuff." Kareem cleared his throat, that deep, rumbling sound that powerful men make when they're trying to regain control of a situation that has spiraled completely beyond their grasp. He straightened in his chair, adjusted his expensive watch. Nervous habit. I'd noticed he did that whenever he was uncomfortable, and looked at me with an expression that was trying very hard to be authoritative but was really just confused. "You understand Arabic?" he asked, like he was still processing this information, like his brain was running through every family dinner, every conversation, every casual comment made over the past 2 years and recalculating the damage. "Since before your daughter learned to fake empathy," I said politely, keeping my tone conversational and pleasant like I was discussing the weather and not delivering a verbal assassination. "I lived in Dubai for 6 years running corporate contracts. Worked with clients from Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Jordan, the UAE. You pick up the language pretty quickly when your job depends on it. Also helps when you actually respect the culture enough to invest time in learning it properly, instead of just assuming everyone should accommodate you." The barb hung in the air, delicately wrapped in politeness, but sharp enough to draw blood. Kareem had made comments throughout the evening about American businessmen who expected everyone to speak English, who didn't bother learning local customs, who treated international business like they could just export American corporate culture wholesale. And here I was, the American son-in-law he'd been dismissing, pointing out that I'd done exactly what he claimed to value while he'd been too busy judging me to notice. More silence. The kind of silence that's somehow louder than any conversation, filled with the collective sound of every person at the table mentally reviewing every single thing they'd said in front of me over the past 2 years and dying inside. Omar was staring at his plate like it might offer him an escape route. Rafiq had his phone out, probably texting someone about this disaster or possibly just looking for something, anything, to do with his hands that wasn't making eye contact with me. The cousins had gone quiet, their earlier amusement replaced with secondhand embarrassment and the dawning realization that they'd all participated in mocking someone who'd understood every word. Samira recovered first, because powerful women don't stay powerful by falling apart in public. She straightened her shoulders, took a delicate sip of her coffee, and attempted to pivot to graciousness. "Well," she said, switching to English with that diplomatic smile that probably worked wonders at charity events and society luncheons, "this is certainly unexpected. If we'd known you spoke Arabic, we would have been nicer." I interrupted, still smiling pleasantly. "More respectful? Actually asked me about my work instead of assuming I was some kind of unemployed loser who got lucky with your daughter? Yeah, probably. That's kind of the point, isn't it? You're only nice to people you think are worth being nice to. Everyone else gets the performance, the polite dismissal, the subtle insults disguised as concern. You could have buttered the tension and served it with dessert at this point. It was thick, palpable, the kind of awkward that seeps into your bones and makes you want to crawl out of your own skin. The waiter who'd whispered his approval to me earlier was hovering near the kitchen, clearly entertained but trying not to show it. Another server walked past our table, took one look at the expressions, and immediately pivoted toward a different section of the restaurant like he'd sensed danger. Then I did something that I'd been planning for exactly this moment. I clinked my glass, that same expensive wine glass that had been part of the evening's subtle mockery and financial bleeding. The sound rang out clear and bright in the silence, and everyone's attention snapped to me like I was about to make a toast at a wedding, except this was more like a funeral for their assumptions and my patience. "To family," I said, raising my glass and looking directly at each person at the table, making eye contact, holding it just long enough to make them uncomfortable. "And to surprises, to the unexpected, to the things we don't see coming because we're too busy assuming we've got everything figured out, to underestimation and irony and the beautiful, poetic justice of reality checking our arrogance." I took a long sip, watching them over the rim of my glass. Nobody joined the toast. Nobody raised their glass or said, "Cheers," or did any of the normal social things you do when someone makes a toast. They just sat there, frozen, like I'd turned them all into statues with my words. "Also," I added, setting my glass down with a gentle clink, "to translation. Real translation. Not the selective, edited-for-content version that makes you feel better about your prejudices, but the actual, honest, word-for-word kind that shows you who people really are when they think you can't understand them." Half the table suddenly found very urgent reasons to check their phones. Urgent texts that needed immediate responses. Important emails that couldn't wait. Breaking news that required their full attention right this second. It was like watching a synchronized swimming routine of avoidance. Everyone moving in perfect harmony toward their devices, their purses, their wallets, anywhere that wasn't this conversation. Omar mumbled something about needing to leave early for a meeting tomorrow, at 9 p.m. on a Friday night. A meeting that definitely wasn't happening, but nobody called him on it because everyone was grateful for an excuse to end this dinner. Rafiq agreed immediately that yes, he also had something early, maybe a study group or a thing with friends. Definitely a legitimate reason to leave right now. The cousins started gathering purses and jackets with the efficiency of people evacuating a building after a fire alarm. Samira maintained her composure but kept glancing at her husband with an expression that screamed, "Do something," while Kareem sat there looking like a man who'd just realized he'd been playing chess against someone he thought was playing checkers and had just gotten checkmated in 4 moves. And Layla? Layla just sat there next to me, her hand no longer in mine, her face cycling through expressions faster than a slot machine. Shock, embarrassment, anger, panic, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Maybe respect? Maybe fear? Maybe just the dawning realization that the man she'd married and promptly filed under manageable had just revealed himself to be something entirely different. I signaled for the check, because I'm not a monster, and I said I'd pay for dinner. $347 of carefully documented humiliation, now with the added value of being the most satisfying money I'd ever spent. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the face. I woke up to 17 missed calls from Layla, who'd spent the night at her parents' house after our silent, tension-filled car ride home had ended with her grabbing an overnight bag and leaving without a word, and a text from my assistant that read, "Kareem Al-Sayed is in the lobby. Says he has a 9 a.m. appointment. Your calendar shows nothing." I stared at that text for a solid 30 seconds, then started laughing, the kind of laughter that probably would have concerned anyone who heard it, the kind that comes from pure, unadulterated cosmic irony. Because here's what Kareem didn't know yet. What he was about to find out in approximately 45 minutes when he walked into our conference room expecting to meet with the impressive American consultant he'd been courting for 6 months. That consultant was me. The meeting he thought he had scheduled was with Michael Chun, Senior Director of Middle Eastern Operations, which was technically correct, since that was my full name and title, but Layla had only ever called me Mike at family gatherings, and apparently nobody had bothered to connect the dots between Mike, who married Layla, and Michael Chun, who's negotiating our biggest international deal. I took my time getting ready, because punctuality is important, but so is dramatic timing. I put on my best suit, the charcoal Tom Ford that I saved for major client meetings and occasions when I needed to project, "I'm more successful than you think I am." I knotted my tie with extra care, chose the cufflinks I'd bought in Dubai from a jeweler near the Burj Khalifa, and made sure every detail was perfect. If you're going to destroy someone's perception of you, you might as well look good doing it. When I walked into the lobby at 8:57 a.m., Kareem was sitting in one of our expensive leather chairs, scrolling through his phone with the casual confidence of a man who thought he was about to close the deal of his career. He was wearing what had to be a $5,000 suit. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he had that aura of success and power that comes from decades of being the most important person in every room he enters. He looked up when I approached, and I watched his expression cycle through confusion, recognition, and then something close to horror as the pieces started clicking into place. "Mike," he said, standing up automatically because good manners are deeply ingrained even when your brain is short-circuiting. Are you working here?" "Working here," I repeated, letting the question hang for just a moment before smiling. "Kareem, I don't work here. I run the entire Middle Eastern division. Have for the past 3 years. Before that, I spent 6 years in Dubai building our presence in the Gulf states. But yes, I suppose working here is technically accurate, if a bit reductive." I watched him process this information, watched his brain trying to reconcile simple son-in-law who needs things explained slowly with senior director of the firm my company desperately wants to partner with. It was like watching someone try to solve a Rubik's Cube while underwater, theoretically possible, but clearly very difficult. "You're Michael Chun," he said slowly, like he was testing the words. "The consultant we've been negotiating with. The one who speaks." He stopped, closed his eyes briefly, and I could actually see the moment when every conversation from the past 6 months replayed in his head with new context. "Perfect Arabic?" I finished for him. "Yes. Surprise number 2. Well, technically surprise number 1.5 since last night was the main event, but who's counting? Come on up to the conference room. We have a lot to discuss." I led him to the elevator, maintaining pleasant small talk about the weather and traffic while he looked like a man walking to his own execution. When we got to the 23rd floor, I walked him past my assistant, who gave me a knowing look because she'd been with me long enough to have heard some stories about the in-laws, and into the conference room that overlooked the city skyline. It was a power room, designed to impress clients and remind them that our firm was serious, successful, and not to be trifled with. I gestured to a chair on the opposite side of the table from where I sat. The symbolism wasn't subtle. This wasn't family dinner anymore. This was business, and in business, we sat on opposite sides of the table because we had opposing interests that needed to be negotiated. "Coffee?" I asked, moving to the expensive espresso machine we kept in the corner, top-of-the-line Italian import, the kind that made coffee that tasted like liquid gold and cost about the same. It's the same machine your family mocked at dinner last night, actually. The one Samira said represented everything wrong with American coffee culture. But I find it makes an excellent espresso. Really, genuinely excellent. Almost like progress and tradition can coexist if you're not too proud to appreciate both. Kareem opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Michael, I didn't know. If I had known that you were. That I was what? I interrupted, pouring 2 espressos with the practiced ease of someone who'd made about 10,000 cups of coffee in this machine. That I was competent, successful, actually good at my job, that I spoke your language and understood your culture and had built a career around exactly the kind of international business relationships you're trying to establish? Yeah, you didn't know that because you never asked. You just assumed. I brought him the espresso, perfect crema, ideal temperature, the kind of coffee that coffee snobs write poetry about, and sat down across from him. Taste progress, I said, echoing my earlier comment, but with an edge that made it clear this wasn't a friendly suggestion. He took a sip automatically, and I saw his expression shift slightly because it was, objectively, really good coffee. This is excellent, he admitted quietly. It is, I agreed. So let's talk business. Your company has been pursuing a partnership with us for 6 months. You want access to our European connections, our project management systems, our reputation in markets you're trying to break into. We've been interested because your company has assets in regions where we want to expand. It could be mutually beneficial. I emphasized the could be and watched him catch the implication. Could be, he repeated carefully. Could be, I confirmed. See, Kareem, here's the thing about international business partnerships. They require trust, respect, the confidence that both parties value each other and will act in good faith. And right now, after last night, after 2 years of family dinners where your entire family, including my wife, treated me like I was some kind of charity project you all had to tolerate, I'm having some serious questions about whether the Al Sayed family understands the concept of respect. He tried politeness, switching to that diplomatic mode that powerful men use when they realize they've miscalculated. Mike, please understand, we didn't mean, it was just family humor, nothing serious. Nothing serious, I repeated, setting down my espresso with deliberate care. Your wife suggested I needed to be trained. Your son spent the evening explaining things to me like I was intellectually challenged. Your daughter, my wife, told everyone I was sweet but simple. And you sat there, nodding along, agreeing that it was fortunate you'd found a real American business partner who actually understood culture, completely oblivious to the fact that you were talking about me. I pulled out a folder. I'd prepared this earlier because I believe in being thorough and slid it across the table. These are the current contract terms we'd been negotiating. Note the pricing structure, the timeline, the access we were offering to our European networks. Generous terms, because we thought your company would be a valuable partner. He reached for the folder, hopeful, probably thinking we were getting down to business. Those terms are no longer available, I said flatly. His hand froze halfway to the folder. As of this morning, I've suspended negotiations on this partnership indefinitely. Not canceled, suspended. Because unlike your family, I believe in giving people opportunities to prove they're better than their worst moments. But right now, Kareem, your company needs us more than we need you, and I think both of us know it. By noon, after 2 hours of the most uncomfortable business meeting of his life, Kareem left with nothing but a promise that I'd consider resuming negotiations after some time had passed. He looked older somehow, diminished, like someone had let the air out of him. My phone rang 5 minutes later. Layla. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. Third time, I answered. Why didn't you tell me you spoke Arabic? Her voice was trembling, caught somewhere between anger and tears. I laughed, actually laughed, because the question was so absurd it looped back around to being funny. Why didn't I tell you? Layla, why didn't you tell me you respected me? Why didn't you tell your family who I actually was instead of letting them treat me like the village idiot for 2 years? Why didn't you defend me even once? Silence on the other end. I'll tell you why, I continued. Because you never asked. You never cared enough to actually know who I was. You married the idea of an American husband, someone safe and manageable who wouldn't challenge your family or your worldview. And when I didn't fit that box perfectly, you just edited me, made me smaller, simpler, more convenient. That's not fair, she whispered. No, I agreed. It's not. None of this is fair, but it is honest, which is more than I can say for the last 2 years of our marriage. Within a week, the gossip spread through the Arab community in our city faster than someone could say, "Did you hear about Layla's husband?" in 3 different dialects. I'm talking wildfire speed, the kind of information transmission that would make Twitter jealous, cascading through family WhatsApp groups and ladies' lunch circles and business networks like a highly entertaining virus that nobody wanted to be immune to. The story got embellished with each retelling, naturally, because that's how gossip works. It's like a game of telephone where everyone adds their own dramatic flair until the truth becomes legend and the legend becomes mythology. The basic facts remained consistent, though. The stupid husband, who supposedly didn't understand Arabic, had not only understood every word, but had corrected a sheikh's grammar at a conference the following Tuesday. That last part wasn't an exaggeration, by the way. I'd been invited to speak on a panel about international business practices, and Sheikh Abdullah Al-Mansuri, old money, influential family, the kind of guy who expected everyone to treat his words like they were inscribed on stone tablets, had made a grammatical error while pontificating about traditional values. Nothing major, just mixed up his verb conjugations in a way that changed "we should preserve" to "we should preserve ourselves," which made his entire sentence about cultural heritage sound vaguely cannibalistic if you were paying attention. I'd corrected him, politely, in front of about 200 people, with a smile. The room had gone silent. Then someone in the back had started laughing. Then suddenly half the audience was either trying not to laugh or looking absolutely scandalized that someone had dared to correct a sheikh. Sheikh Abdullah had stared at me for a long moment, and I genuinely thought he might have security escort me out or possibly challenge me to some kind of honor duel. Instead, he'd started laughing too, this big booming laugh that filled the conference hall, and said, finally, an American who actually learned the language properly instead of just memorizing business phrases, "We should hire you to teach our children." That story made the rounds even faster than the dinner revelation. Suddenly, I wasn't just the son-in-law who'd surprised everyone. I was the American who'd out-Arabed the Arabs, the foreigner who knew the language better than some native speakers, the guy who'd been hiding his competence like a secret weapon and had finally deployed it with surgical precision. Layla's relatives alternated between apologizing and pretending to admire my mystery, depending on their personality type and how guilty they felt about the past 2 years. Her cousin Nadia, or maybe it was Noor, I still wasn't entirely sure, sent me a long text message that essentially said, "I always knew you were smart. I was just playing along with everyone else. Please don't hold it against me." Right. Sure you did. Omar attempted to reach out through LinkedIn of all places, sending me a connection request with a message about building bridges and moving forward professionally, which I ignored because I'm petty and also because watching him squirm was more satisfying than any professional networking opportunity he could offer. Rafiq showed up at my office building one afternoon, looking sheepish and holding what appeared to be expensive scotch as a peace offering. My assistant buzzed me. "There's a young man in the lobby with alcohol and regret. Says he's your brother-in-law." I had her send him away, but I appreciated the effort. At least the kid had the decency to feel bad about it, even if his approach to apologizing needed work. The best part, though, the absolute cherry on top of this chaotic Sunday, was Samira's response. 3 days after the dinner, I received a handwritten note on actual stationery, the expensive kind with her monogram embossed in gold at the top, because even apologies needed to maintain certain standards of presentation. The handwriting was elegant, practiced, the kind of penmanship they don't teach anymore, because everyone just types everything. It read, "Dear Michael, we were only joking at dinner. Family humor can sometimes be misunderstood by those not accustomed to our ways. We hope you understand that no offense was intended. Warm regards, Samira." I read it 3 times, each time getting more impressed by the sheer audacity. We were only joking. Misunderstood by those not accustomed to our ways. The woman had somehow managed to apologize while simultaneously implying that the problem was my inability to understand their sophisticated humor rather than, their 2-year campaign of subtle disrespect. It was almost artistic in its complete lack of self-awareness. I replied the same day, also with a handwritten note, because if we were being petty we might as well commit to the aesthetic. My handwriting wasn't as elegant. I'm American. We abandoned penmanship somewhere around the time we invented computers, but I made it legible. "Dear Samira, Thank you for the clarification. I was also joking when I said I'd pay for dinner. Family humor can sometimes be misunderstood by those who assume others don't understand. I hope you understand that no offense was intended when I suspended your husband's business proposal. Warm regards, Michael. I had it delivered by courier, because if you're going to be dramatic, you might as well go all the way. My assistant thought it was hilarious. You're going to hell, she told me, laughing while she arranged the courier service. But at least you'll have great stories. The business proposal suspension was the nuclear option, the thing that transformed this from interpersonal drama into something with actual consequences that affected their bottom line. Within 24 hours of sending that note, I received calls from 3 different Al Sayed family members who suddenly wanted to discuss misunderstandings and opportunities for reconciliation. Not apologies. Mind you, reconciliation, which is diplomatically different because it implies both parties made mistakes rather than one party being objectively terrible for 2 years. I didn't answer those calls. I was too busy fielding interest from other companies who'd heard that the Al Sayed deal had fallen through and wanted to know if we were looking for alternative partners in the region. Turns out, suspending negotiations with one of the biggest construction firms in the Middle East makes you look either crazy or incredibly principled, and in business, people respect principled even when they think you're crazy for passing up money. My firm's partners called a meeting to discuss the situation because losing a potentially lucrative deal requires explanation. I walked them through everything: the family dinners, the disrespect, the discovery, the principle of not doing business with people who don't respect you. I expected pushback, maybe some pressure to reconsider for the sake of the company's bottom line. Instead, our senior partner, a 60-year-old woman named Margaret who'd built her career on being smarter and tougher than everyone underestimating her, actually smiled. Good, she said. We don't need clients who think we're desperate enough to accept disrespect. There are plenty of other firms in the region who'll treat us like partners instead of convenient tools. Make sure this story gets around. Let people know we have standards. So we did. We made sure everyone in the industry knew, through carefully worded statements to trade publications and strategic conversations at networking events, that Shun and Associates had suspended negotiations with Al Sayed Construction due to incompatible business philosophies and questions about mutual respect in the partnership dynamic. Corporate speak for they treated us like trash, so we walked away. The response was interesting. Half the industry thought we were insane for walking away from that much money over personal issues. The other half, the half that mattered, respected us more for it. We got 3 new client inquiries that week from companies that specifically mentioned they appreciated working with firms that maintained dignity and standards. Kareem's company, meanwhile, started restructuring. Not publicly, not in a way that made headlines, but through the subtle signs that people in the industry recognize: delayed projects, renegotiated contracts, whispers about cash flow concerns, and expansion plans being put on hold. Turns out, arrogance isn't tax-deductible, and the European market access they'd been counting on through our partnership wasn't easy to replace. Other firms were willing to work with them, sure, but on less favorable terms now that everyone knew Al Sayed Construction had somehow screwed up a deal that should have been a guaranteed win. I wish I could say I felt bad about it. I wish I could claim some moral high ground about not wanting to hurt people or damage their business or whatever noble sentiment would make me seem like a better person. But honestly, I didn't feel bad. Not even a little bit. They'd spent 2 years making me feel small, and now they were learning that actions have consequences and words matter, and you can't just apologize your way out of systematic disrespect. Layla called less frequently as the week progressed, her messages shifting from anger to confusion to something that might have been genuine remorse, but was probably just panic about the social fallout. Her friends were asking questions. Her family was in crisis mode. Her father's business was suddenly uncertain, and her husband, the sweet, simple one who needed things explained slowly, had somehow become the villain or the hero depending on who you asked. I didn't answer most of her calls, but I did listen to the voicemails, cataloging them the same way I'd catalog the insults at dinner. Evidence. Documentation. A record of everything that happened when the truth finally came out, and the carefully constructed facade of our marriage crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. A month later, I found myself sitting at the same Damascus Rose restaurant, same glittering chandeliers, same overpriced menu, Same marble floors that reflected your face back at you like a mirror asking if you'd learned anything. Except this time the context was completely different. This time I was here with my own team, 8 colleagues from the firm who'd just closed a major deal with a Turkish construction company that made the Al Sayed partnership look like small potatoes in comparison. We were celebrating, actually celebrating, not performing celebration while secretly mocking each other in languages we assumed others didn't understand. The laughter around my table was genuine, the kind that comes from people who actually like each other and aren't bound together by obligation and shared DNA and centuries of cultural expectations about family loyalty. Layla had moved back in with her parents 2 weeks after the dinner incident, packing her things while I was at work like she was staging some kind of dramatic exit that I wouldn't witness. She'd left a note, because apparently we were a family of note writers now, that said something about needing space and time to think and figure out who we were as individuals before we could be partners. Corporate therapy speak that meant, I can't handle the social embarrassment of being married to you right now. I'd come home to half-empty closets and absent toiletries in an apartment that suddenly felt bigger and quieter and, honestly, more peaceful than it had in months. I didn't fight it. Didn't call her begging for reconciliation or suggesting couples counseling, or any of the things that people do when they're trying to save marriages that probably shouldn't be saved. I just hired a lawyer, a good one, the kind that charges by the hour but actually knows what she's doing, and started the paperwork. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of the simple recognition that you can't build a life with someone who fundamentally doesn't respect you. And respect isn't something you can create through therapy or time or wishful thinking. The rumor mill, that ever-churning engine of community gossip, reported that Kareem's company was restructuring, which is business euphemism for things are not going well and we're scrambling to fix it before everyone notices how badly things are going. Apparently arrogance isn't tax-deductible. I'd made that joke before, but it bore repeating because the irony was just too perfect. The European expansion they'd been planning, the international partnerships they'd been bragging about, the vision of Al Sayed Construction becoming a global player, all of it was on hold, delayed, pending market conditions, which really meant pending our ability to find someone else willing to work with us after we torched our most promising partnership opportunity. Projects were being renegotiated at less favorable terms. Investors were asking uncomfortable questions. The family's social standing, so carefully cultivated over decades of strategic marriages and business success and charitable donations to the right causes, was taking hits from unexpected directions. People talked. People always talk. And what they were saying wasn't flattering. Whispers about poor judgment, questions about whether the family's traditional values had made them too rigid to adapt to modern business realities, speculation about succession planning when the current leadership clearly couldn't read people well enough to avoid alienating crucial partners. I'd heard through the grapevine, and by grapevine I mean my assistant who somehow knew everything about everyone and probably moonlighted as an intelligence operative, that Samira was particularly unhappy about the whole situation. She'd apparently told several friends that I'd overreacted and taken things too personally, and clearly didn't understand how family dynamics work. The cognitive dissonance was almost impressive. Even now, even after everything, she couldn't quite grasp that the problem wasn't my understanding of family dynamics, but her family's fundamental inability to treat me like a human being worthy of basic respect. When the waiter approached our table, not the same waiter from that fateful dinner, but someone who clearly worked here regularly and had probably heard the stories, he recognized me immediately. His eyes lit up with that particular gleam that people get when they encounter someone who's become a minor legend in their workplace. "Mr. Chun," he said with what seemed like genuine warmth, "it's good to see you again. Same table as last time." I looked at the table where I'd sat with the Al Sayeds, where I'd smiled through 2 hours of subtle humiliation while planning my eventual revelation. It was currently occupied by another large family group, talking and laughing, and probably creating their own complicated dynamics that I'd never know about. "Different chapter," I said, gesturing to where my team was already seated near the windows with a view of the city skyline. "But thank you for asking." He nodded, understanding more than the words conveyed, and guided me to where my colleagues were already diving into appetizers and arguing good-naturedly about which project had been more stressful to complete. This was what professional relationships should look like: mutual respect, honest communication, the ability to disagree without disrespect, celebration that didn't come with hidden barbs or subtle reminders of your inadequacy. We ordered too much food, because that's what you do when the company's paying and you've just landed a deal that'll keep everyone employed and bonused for the foreseeable future. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from work to personal lives to random tangents about movies and sports and the best pizza places in the city. Nobody needed to perform. Nobody was keeping score. Nobody was translating between what they said and what they meant, because everyone just said what they meant in the first place. Margaret, our senior partner who'd backed my decision to walk away from the Al Sayed deal, raised her glass when dessert arrived, baklava again, because apparently this restaurant had a theme. To principles, she said, her voice carrying that authority that comes from 30 years of refusing to compromise on values. To knowing your worth and refusing to accept less. To Michael, who reminded all of us that some deals aren't worth making, no matter how good they look on paper. Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment, and I felt something unexpected: contentment. Not happiness exactly. Divorce proceedings and family drama aren't happy, but that deeper sense of being aligned with yourself, of having acted according to your values even when it cost you something. That feeling of knowing you'd drawn a line and stood by it. I raised my own glass, looking at my reflection in the polished surface before turning to face my team. To understanding every word, I said, the phrase carrying weight that only I fully understood but that everyone could appreciate on some level. To pretending not to, just long enough to win. To patience and timing and the sweet satisfaction of proving people wrong about their worst assumptions. We drank, and the wine tasted better than it had at that disastrous family dinner. Same restaurant, same wine list, probably the same vintage, but context changes everything. Victory makes everything taste sweeter, and this was victory even if it came wrapped in the complicated package of a failing marriage and burnt bridges with my in-laws. After dinner, after we'd split the check. Actually split it, like reasonable adults who didn't use financial transactions as power plays. I stood on the sidewalk outside the Damascus Rose, looking up at the building that had been the setting for both my humiliation and my triumph. My phone buzzed. Another message from Layla, her third this week, asking if we could talk, really talk, about what happened and where we went wrong. I deleted it without responding, because we both knew where we went wrong. We went wrong when she decided I was a project instead of a partner. We went wrong when I let her get away with it for 2 years. We went wrong when both of us chose comfort over honesty and performance over authenticity. But standing there on the sidewalk, watching my colleagues say goodbye and head home to their own lives, I felt something that had been missing for months: hope. Not hope that things would work out with Layla, that ship had sailed, caught fire, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean, but hope that the next chapter would be better, that I'd learned something from this mess. That I'd never again pretend to be less than I was just to make someone else comfortable. I pulled out my phone and opened the translation app, not because I needed it, but because the symbolism felt right. I typed a message to myself in English, then had it translate to Arabic, then back to English again. The translation was imperfect, slightly off. The meaning shifted through the double conversion, exactly like what Layla had done with our relationship, filtering everything through her lens until the original meaning was lost. I deleted the translation and typed a new note, this time just in English, simple and direct, to new beginnings, to honesty, to finding people who don't need you to be smaller to make them feel bigger. Then, in perfect Arabic, speaking only to myself in the quiet evening air, I whispered, to new beginnings, and walked toward my car, toward my apartment that was quieter but more honest, toward whatever came next in this chapter of my life that I was writing for myself instead of having translated by someone else. The Damascus Rose glittered behind me, all gold and marble and expensive pretension, the stage where I'd played my best role and delivered my best performance. But I was done performing now, done translating between what I was and what people wanted me to be, done sitting at tables where I wasn't actually welcome. Time to find new tables, new restaurants, new chapters that didn't require subtitles because everyone spoke the same language of mutual respect and honest communication. Time to build a life that didn't need translation.